Hey, everybody, welcome to Black Lotus, where we talk about all things strange and unusual. But today we're going to get away from our normal venue, whereas we usually talk about aliens and Bigfoot and, you know, whatever else. Today we're going to get away from that and we're going to be talking about legendary creatures and that come from folklore and the differences from the way we view these monsters today as opposed to the way they were originally viewed. But first of all, let me say happy Mother's Day to everybody. And we've got Wild Trees, our resident scientist here.
Hello, everybody.
We've got Michael Roser from DarkHour Paranormal. And he just released some songs and videos and through Third Phase of Moon. And I got to tell you, check it out. It's awesome. It is awesome. And all the songs are about paranormal stuff, or conspiracy stuff, but yeah, definitely check that out. But anyway, Ralph, guys, happy Mother's Day.
Thank you.
Happy Mother's Day to all of you. For those of us here who are mothers. Perhaps in another life, but
mothers.
Mother, can you play? What was it Danzig sang? Mother. That's the only word I remember from the whole thing. And
I don't remember that at all. Actually,
it's from the '90s. Believe it or not, it's not even as old as it should be. But the sound is vintage. Anyway, never mind.
So I want to start this off actually with a poem, and it's by Joel Fradbeek, and it goes. To one who, journeying through night and fog, is mired neck deep in unwholesome bog, experience, like the rising of the dawn, reveals the path that he should not have gone. And the reason I wanted to start this is because every monster movie I've ever seen could be set up that way. I mean, somebody's creeping through the fog and somebody's being stalked and, they quickly realize, that they're about to be attacked or something by a werewolf or what have you. So, yeah. But I think Ralph and I just talked to an interesting guy yesterday, and his name is A.P. Sylvia, and he is the the author of the book called Vampires of Lore, Traits and Modern Misconceptions. And he was a fascinating guest, actually, a lot better than I thought he was going to be. Because to be honest, I really wasn't looking forward to this interview because I'm thinking, what could he tell us about vampires that everybody doesn't already know?
Yeah.
Well, he told us a lot about how the original lore of vampires is very different from the way we look at it today. Vampires today have been formed by Hollywood and pop culture. They were never, like the Fangs thing that was first brought about in, what was that horror movie studio, Ralph, in England? Hammer, something like that. Anyway, yeah, vampires were never depicted with fangs before they put out their version of Dracula. And I think Christopher, what's his name, was the first one to sport fangs as a vampire, and then he was also telling us that like the whole stake through the heart thing is real, but they didn't do it to kill the vampire. What their intention is to drive the stake through the chest, out the back, and into the earth. And that way, when the vampire would try to rise to go feed on people, it wouldn't be able to get up, So
that's very creepy, very creepy. But yeah, that's cool.
That's strange. But, yeah. What do you guys know about vampires?
This reminds me of an interview I did with Thomas D'Agostino, I believe was how you say his name. He is the author of a couple. Actually, no, I'm sorry, like a handful of books that deal with legend and folklore. I'm going to grab a clip from that interview regarding vampires in just a moment. But to give my 2 cents while I let Wild Trees take it away and Ralph do the honors, vampires themselves, out of all the different specters and things, I wish had some sort of validity in respect to the image that we see today. It's a shadow of what that legend was. You have to go back and look at superstitions of the time. You have to look at social constructs and what they were dealing with in respect to disease, how they viewed those diseases, A lot of this,
Right.
again, comes back to superstition and even some of the more ritual end of, what these creatures might be, whether, they're sticking a rock in their mouth while they're buried or they're driving the stake, like you mentioned, Damien. They have some root in actual practice, but like you're suggesting here, our interpretation of what that actually meant might be quite different from the reason they were doing it back then.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting. Well, I really want to listen to that. I'm going to listen to that episode. You said that was a podcast episode?
Yeah, it's Paranormal News Network. I've got a link for it in the description, but yeah, it'll be uploaded this coming Wednesday.
I'll be looking forward to that too.
Gotcha. So yeah, I'm getting the impression, and I may be incorrect, but yeah, I'm getting the impression that of vampires in particular, their popular depiction is very different or perverted from what it originally was. So that makes it hard to analyze. But I'm curious to see which other monsters are actually more accurate to what was going on back then. But I am an expert with modern vampires because I grew up with the vampire lore. So I'm going to speak on that, which is still interesting. But unfortunately, I can't speak to the original roots of the legend. But if you look at the current understanding of vampires in popular culture, it is a very scary image, and it is interesting. Just like Michael said, it makes a comment on illness and disease, because it seems to me that vampires pass on a disease to you. That's one way of looking at it. I'm not sure if it's ever been described that way, but basically it seems like by biting you, kind of like a dog would bite you to give you rabies, by biting you, a vampire can give you what they have, which seems like a really bad medical condition. So that's interesting. That also has parallels to zombieism. Zombieism could be considered a disease as well. It's definitely a medical condition.
Well, again, with like zombieism, I mean, that has changed over the years too. I mean,
another one, yeah, absolutely. That one has been perverted as well. Yeah, so those two have that in common. But yeah, I mean, I like vampires. I think it's interesting. They also seem to be they seem to be a mixture of a lot of things. Like they seem like the modern depiction seems to treat them biologically as predators of humans, but at the same time, they are like being manipulated by this disease, that they have. So I wonder. So there's parts of parasitism and predation involved with the modern vampire myth. But I wonder. Now I'm curious in the modern myth, like where does this vampirism come from? I know sometimes they talk about an original vampire, but is that original vampire that started everything? Is he like an alien? Is he an other? Where did he come from? Could this modern depiction of vampires be talking about other? Like an alien? Could it really actually be an alien? I don't know.
That's a good point. Alien. It could be alien.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, what AP Sylvie was telling us was that, way back when, like in the, 1800s or whatever, nobody wanted to be a vampire.
Right.
They thought it was just like the most awful thing that could happen to you. And now everybody wants to be a vampire because, and he was saying, I think it appeals to our sense of mortality, that we can be young and fresh and live forever, and so that really appeals, and that appeals to to our modern generation, and how we are always in. Trying to improve upon ourselves constantly. We're a generation that is not willing to age, and so, but but a lot of this is due to, I think, the romanticism, which actually started with Dracula. Right. Prior to that, there was nothing romantic about vampires. Right. But it started with Dracula and went up through the years, and certainly Anne Rice has really added to that whole romanticism thing, and the whole Twilight series. Vampires don't sparkle, but that it really appeals to the younger generation.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
I think that's funny too. I mean, I was going to mention Anne Rice as well, because I think she was just as formidable in the creation of what we understand to be a vampire today as perhaps Bram Stoker was. If you read the lore that she's put behind her stories. I think it's called Memnoch the Devil is the book, which actually really encompasses her world. You get straight into this, and while you're reading it, because she's so proficient at being able to convey this imagery in this world that she lives in, you almost start believing that this was a possibility, and you could create an entire religion out of Memnoch the Devil. So if that's reflective at its very core, what creatures have come out of that, what creations come out of that initial vision, such as the vampires, are so intricate in personality and really, again, mirror, I think, what a lot of us feel internally before we go on an escape, like getting into something as heavy as Interview with the Vampire and going on that journey mentally and so forth. It is still entertainment in the end, but the believability, because of the talent behind the writing, really, for some people, might make it a little bit more murky in respect to where some of these imaginary ideas came from.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Kim, how's it going?
Hey, Kim.
All right. Hi.
Hey, Kim.
How you guys doing?
Good.
I thought
Happy
I could
Mother's
use my
Day.
laptop and do this tonight.
Yes.
I was wrong.
Happy Mother's Day to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Happy Mother's Day.
So
Kimberly.
we're
Thank you.
talking
Mother's Day.
vampires. We're talking vampires, and we were just talking about Anne Rice. You know, I got to tell you, one of the things I love about Anne Rice is the amount of research she puts into all of her books. And
Right.
one of the things I loved about Interview with a Vampire was when Louis was talking to the to the interviewer, and he was talking about the myths behind vampires, where garlic isn't a thing, and he actually thought of crucifixes as being actually very beautiful, and he said, the whole stake through the heart thing. He said it's all nothing, and that's one of the things that I really appreciated about that, is that she did look up the lore, and she researched the lore and found that this is all modern culture stuff, rather than being, taken from actual folklore.
Right.
Right.
But Kim, what are your thoughts about vampires?
There's a romantic side to it. There's a horror side to it. There's all different sides to vampires and all the creatures, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We were just
There's
talking
all
about that.
different kinds of things written about.
Yeah, we were just talking about the romanticism that has been developed in modern culture with vampires.
Right.
As opposed to way back in the 1800s, where vampires were considered ghouls and that kind of thing. And so
Right.
yeah, now ever since Dracula, it's really become just this whole romanticized vision of them. But you know what? Let's talk about people who identify as vampires in modern culture. I mean, they take energy from people willingly, or they actually take blood, and they have these little rituals that they do. And there's actually
types.
Say again.
There's different types of vampires. That's for sure.
Right. And we're talking about these people who dress up like vampires, and there's a website out there, and I can't remember the name of it, but they actually have ads from people who identify as vampires, and they're looking for willing participants, donors, to work with them. And I mean, it's just this huge, fascinating culture. And I don't think I've ever met one of these people, but I'd love to talk to them at some point, because the whole idea kind of fascinates me, and not so much that I want to be involved with it, but I just think the whole idea is fascinating.
But like everything, it can only go so far. I mean, take, for example, the whole witch craze that kind of captivated the youth back in the 90s, wherein goth itself as a style and genre was intertwined with, a bit of magic and so forth. Then you had the that movie with the three girls there, Wild Trees, help me out. Thank you.
Yeah,
The Craft.
Yeah.
That was a very impactful movie for, kids that were interested in anything like that at the time. But again, it sort of comes to light, and then whatever it actually is eventually falls by the wayside as people move on with different interests. And hopefully, as a collective, they deepen their understanding of a subject by going through a period of time where something like that is a fad. I couldn't look at the vampire fad in any other way. Yes, you're going to have some people who are very extreme about that. I mean, look at the people that have these body modifications that basically turn them into something not even recognizable. I don't judge them at all. I think it's fantastic if that's your expression, but the majority of people aren't doing that or holding that sort of space mentally, wherein that's what they want to do. But, you know, again, as time goes on, especially in the way of vampirism and, you know, the classic romantic view of it here, it just compounds itself. And, you know, we're going to have to mentally jump on some sort of mental archaeology later on to kind of dig through the surface here to find out where vampires really came. Just to let you know, Damien, very quickly in the private chat, I sent you the link to that interview around 5640. We're starting to talk a little bit about the vampires and the superstition. If you're interested, I just threw that in
Okay.
there. No.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't think that real vampires have ever existed. I think that there are people throughout history who have been convicted of it. There's several famous stories out there where these people would abduct victims. And there's one that happened, I think it was in Germany, and he would lure young boys to his home, and then he would basically bite their necks and drink their blood. But then he would chop them up, and in true Sweeney Todd fashion, he would sell them as meat, as what they called secondhand meat or something like that, you know. But I think that there are people that have been like that throughout history. But I think the majority of vampires out there can be attributed to, like Wild Trees was saying, the social factors. You know, I mean, and what was going on at the time, say a plague was happening, and one person is to blame for all of this because they didn't really understand science. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, it really comes back to blood, right?
Sure.
It doesn't. It just really comes back to blood. It's not about, for most people, the image of the vampire went down to the nitty gritty of it. That sort of comes secondary. It's about the power of the blood. So that has plenty of historical significance in the way that our ancestors viewed blood as something powerful. Maybe that's part of what we're still living through, just as an idea.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
But wasn't it something in the blood that they craved or that they needed?
That's one theory. There's a lot of theories about vampires and what they're all about. Like, for instance, like I was mentioning earlier, the stake through the heart was meant to pin them down to the earth so they couldn't get up again. It wasn't to kill them. And then there was another theory about the stake through the heart, because the heart was the source of blood, people thought. And so then they had different kinds of wood that you had to use for the stake. And it was that was mainly a religious connotation, you know, depending on the kind of wood, like the wood that was used for Jesus's crucifixion. You know, you had to use that kind of wood, you know, and that brings in the religious aspect to it.
They're actually still doing that over in that country. I forget what, Romania.
Oh, really?
There was a documentary not too long ago where they're still doing that. Where there's a family that actually did that. They dug the sky up, and they actually did this again.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I know the backstory there.
Yeah. Well, I know that, like in places like Haiti and stuff like that, they're still burning witches. You know, so this folklore lives on today.
It all recycles again.
Yeah. Michael, you were talking about how it all goes back to the blood, and I was curious about this, so I looked this up. Why the whole garlic thing? Well, back then they thought that garlic was good for the blood, and so therefore, if you have a strand of garlic outside your home, you know, it would deter vampires. You know,
yes.
But I don't really understand that, because it would be almost like an advertisement. Hey, I've got good blood here.
Yeah.
It's like ringing the dinner bell. You know?
Damien, as far as what you mentioned, as far as people who are open about being a vampire, whatever that means to them, I've only seen one interview with. I've seen some people do it on TV or on YouTube, and to me, they seem just like posers. but I honestly don't know enough about this subculture to comment on it. What I will say is that I'm pretty sure that most people who have the paranormal heavily in their lives, whether they have it under control, like a psychic or a vampire, or not, like somebody who's being abducted or has a haunting, I'm pretty sure that most people that have intense paranormal activities like a vampire would are very quiet about it, and they keep it very secret. I don't think they would tell people about it.
That's what I've heard. Like I said, I went to that website that promotes this kind of thing, and people are like that. They're very secretive about it. They don't want the whole world to know about it. I mean,
well, I'm sure they would be judged.
Sure, they would. You know, I mean, let's say one of these people is a lawyer.
Yeah,
he doesn't want that to get out. You know, so yeah, but yeah.
Well, yeah, if people started coming up missing, they'd be the first ones looked at.
Right, exactly.
They'd be the first suspects.
The other thing I was thinking, Damien, is that as far as so it looks like zombies and like we're talking about vampires. The origin is probably pretty perverted in our modern story, but sure. I think it is interesting that the story remains even a little piece of it. And if I had to guess, once again, I'm just guessing. I haven't done the research. But probably the originator of the vampire legend was probably something like a black-eyed child or a humanoid alien. It was probably some kind of weird humanoid for sure. I think that part is true, at least, that it looked like a human. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the origins. I think it's still interesting that we stick around to this story.
Yeah.
It's still there.
You were mentioning how a lot of these people like to dress up in black, or I think Michael was talking about, how the golf culture got involved with Wicca way back in the 90s. And back then I was involved with Wicca, but we had a term for those people, and that was fluffy bunnies. And because that's all they thought it was. I'm going to dress up with black and go around cursing people. And it's like, it's nothing could be further from the truth as to what we actually do, But again, it takes someone to actually look further into it to realize that witchcraft is actually kind of boring. There's not. But so, what about werewolves? Michael, you got a lot of hair. What do you know about werewolves?
Thankfully, no werewolves have come to claim most of it. Werewolves to me may be, a product of, again, superstition. I believe that there's a lot of that imbued within that story as a whole. But if there is something known as Dogman, which is obviously we've talked about being more recently prone to sightings, that subject. If that's the case, maybe that's interwoven with the lore as well. It's hard to tell. I mean, these were times, where people were not as connected as they are today. The food that they were eating may have had some sort of contamination, such as the ergo rye. There were so many different things, going into a hyper fever because you're getting sick and not realizing, this new sickness that's about you because you're so removed from villages. This is how stories begin. And as we've talked about, when somebody doesn't understand something, more often than not, the inclination is to mystify it. And unfortunately, because that mystification is so prevalent and rampant in respect to certain legends, that's the story that carries on, and we're sort of left at the end of the day to pick up those pieces. So to get back to your question there about werewolves, I sort of put it in the same box as I do vampires, something of lore, at least in the way that we look at it. There have been many instances of shape-shifting, which, in respect to perhaps the indigenous people of any culture, someone from the outside seeing something like that happening, not understanding the implications and the magic behind it, watching a shape shifting in front of their eyes. They're going to fear that. Again, fear of the unknown, not understanding.
Michael,
European settlers.
It's funny you mentioned it's funny you mentioned the shape shifting, because that's what my comment was going to be on werewolves. Is the one aspect I think is true in the werewolf story is shape shifting. Because I truly believe I believe shape shifting is an adaptation or a technology someone has. I truly believe that. Yeah.
Sure. Look at the whole Skinwalker Ranch thing. The Skinwalkers, they're shapeshifters. Yep. Yeah. So, and that's been in
the dire wolves.
I'm sorry, say again?
And I said, let's throw in the dire wolves.
Right. The dire wolves, most definitely. And, they were bred out,
And those were
but-
also on the Skinwalker Ranch as well.
Right.
Mhm,
Right.
mhm. Yeah, and what was I going to say? Ralph, take it over. I don't remember.
Well, I think it's comes down to what we were talking about before too, mental illness or some type of illness from way back then. I'm sure, I don't know if anybody else has worked. I know Damien has, but we've worked at bars before, and I know that when there's a full moon, people change.
People do indeed
People are-
change.
People are much harder to get to calm down and things like that.
Mhm.
So I can see how a lure of a werewolf would come about.
I've heard that was that's a big myth, that when there's a full moon that people act erratically. And
That's
I can tell you, like
in nursing homes.
right.
Yeah.
You work in a hospital, you work in a bar, you work as a police officer. All those people will tell you that it's not a myth at all. People do react very funky to full moons. They're more wide awake, it seems, and they're irritable. But
Very cool.
I think the thing about werewolves is that I think a lot of it throughout history has had a lot to do with like social pariahs. People who have been outed or ousted from their little community or the village. And if anything goes wrong in that village, they immediately blame this person, and they go.
What if
out
it
and
was something more physical? What if it was something more physical? I mean, hypotrichrosis has
Right.
been documented for a very long time. It's also known as the werewolf syndrome, wherein
Right.
Hair grows everywhere, as thick as what it is on my face, and they actually look to have some sort of different characteristics, perhaps in the way of a canine. I don't know, and I haven't really come across many reports of this particular condition being recorded from one point back. So I don't know, maybe that plays in there too.
Absolutely. I could see
Now,
that.
I also want to talk about dog-headed men in general, because there are stories in history, even at Skinwalker Ranch. So what Kim was mentioning, a dire wolf, for people that don't know, is a extinct species of wolf. And then Damien mentioned it was probably bred out. That's possible. I haven't done the research, but there used to be these very large. There used to be a lot of species of dogs that are not around today. There used to be a lot of wolves, but this dire wolf is a large wolf. So in Skinwalker Ranch, people mentioned that they saw one of these creatures. So it's thought that perhaps it came over through a time portal or something. But at Skinwalker Ranch, there was also a report of like somebody was walking around the city and he saw two guys smoking a cigarette and just standing with clothes. But when they turned around, they had the faces of dogs. They were dog-headed men. Another dog-headed thing was like, I think Marco Polo or Alexander the Great. I don't remember the explorer, but some explorer mentioned in his travels that he saw an island or a city of men, and they were all dog-headed and they were like warriors or something. And then one more thing about a Skinwalker Ranch and dogs is that there was this one guy who worked military at Skinwalker Ranch. He said when he went home, one of these paranormal entities attached to him, and he brought it home to his family. And he said one time what happened is they went out to their front yard, and he saw like a wolf that was standing upright like a human and leaning back on a tree and like looking at them. So this wolf stuff is very integrated into a lot of. Oh, and then you think about Anubis, you think about the Egyptians and dog-headed gods. So the human dog connection is also there in history, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Isn't it associated with a specific race like the Anakai or something like that? I can't remember. But
Perhaps,
yeah, I recall some brush in my research with an entire species of extraterrestrials that donned the dog-headed faces. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. I don't know anything about that. I mean, I know about Anubis, the jackal-headed god. But yeah.
What about?
I'll see what I can find again.
What about Dogman? Have you guys? Only recently found out about Dogman reports. I had no idea they were a thing.
Oh yeah, and I didn't know either until probably about 2 years ago, and then suddenly everybody's talking about Dogmen, and it's like, where the hell did this come from? But apparently, it's folklore. It goes way back. With the indigenous people.
But then
these
again,
dogmen aren't.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, dogmen though, they aren't werewolves. They don't change from human to dog.
Oh, exactly. No, they don't.
Well, that we know of.
Right,
that we know
that we know of.
Yeah. Because I know I have heard that that's one plausible explanation as to why we've never caught one, is that they're actually people. You know,
Right.
there could be werewolves. But you know, you were mentioning Wild, that that one story where this guy saw a dog that was standing upright against a tree, and I know that wolves will do this, and they do it like bears will do this to scratch their backs on the tree.
Okay.
So I think that that's entirely feasible. However, if this dog was or wolf was the size of a man, that begs the question again about dire wolves. Are they still there? Are they still out there?
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, there's one thing I can say for sure. I would put Dogman and Bigfoot into completely separate categories.
Yeah.
I think that Bigfoot does, well, regardless of whether or not Dogman has a physical element to him, which I would imagine that he does, I still think it's very different than Bigfoot. Maybe there are a whole slew of different species of life, if you will, that has the ability to switch their frequency overall in a very conscious way. It may be like a protection mechanism or some sort of defense that they've garnered through evolution, wherein we have this too, but we just haven't cultivated it. You know, those are things to consider too, especially when you're thinking about woods that are very, very rarely, if ever, traversed, and what might still be going on, you know, parallel to our own lives.
Exactly.
Sure. You know, and again, it goes back to the, you know, comparing Bigfoot to Dogman. Both of them, I mean, there's enough wooded forest in North America for them to be able to hide out in indefinitely.
Right.
You know, I mean, there could be entire tribes of Sasquatch out there, and we just don't know it. And the same thing goes with Dogman, you know, and they're smart enough to stay away from human beings for the most part. You know, they see that we go out and hunt animals, and they don't want to get hunted.
What's that?
I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
we don't
Kim?
know all the species there is to start with. I mean, there's
Yeah.
new ones that pop up all the time, and we don't know where they came from to start with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
we don't know.
Well, we
if
have to
they're
keep in
in
mind-
an interdimension. Go ahead.
We have to keep in mind too that the Native Americans also considered these beings elusive, and they lived in the woods side by side with them. Now we're
Right.
outside. Yeah, we're outside looking for these, going, why we can't find them? It's a crazy thing. But the Native Americans were living right next door, and they still considered them something that was, again, elusive. So
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, I don't know. I think the whole werewolf thing, going back to the werewolf thing, I really believe that the majority of reports about werewolves can be attributed to, you know, people that were considered social pariahs, you know. But yeah. So what are your thoughts, werewolf?
Like I said, I think it's a mental thing that has just came into giving people the idea about werewolves. I don't think that werewolves are possible.
Yeah. But however, like we were mentioning, I do think people do change. And, you know, like you're saying, it's a mental thing, you know, but I mean, like with the full moon, I know for a fact that people do change and they act very erratic.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I think that can certainly be attributed.
That's where the
to-
lore has come from.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you guys mentioned that, the first thing I thought about was designing an experiment. So I would love to, I could probably work out an experiment, maybe at a bar or a hospital, where I could test whether people act differently during a full moon. That'd be really
That'd be
cool.
awesome.
If it hasn't been done before, that'd be awesome.
Go visit
Well, I
a
know-
nursing home.
yeah.
Exactly.
I know that, you know, like I said, I've seen studies that debunk the whole full moon myth, and they were done with like animals by biologists, by scientists. And so
Gotcha.
whose phone's ringing?
Mine.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's a pretty cool groove.
So before we do wrap it up, let's finally talk about zombies. Zombies are, again, they're very different today as opposed to way back when.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and they've been around throughout history. I mean, even in the Gilgamesh thing, that what was it called? The Tales of Gilgamesh or something like that. they talk about the undead rising and how if society doesn't clean up their ways, then they would be cursed with the undead. And so, I mean, it goes way, way, way back, you know.
Yeah. Right.
But prior to the flesh-eating ghouls, I mean, zombies were they came out of Africa. I mean, and out of their religious belief, and it was considered a curse. You know, I mean, it was the whole idea of zombies was that if you were cursed as to be a zombie, then basically you had no will of your own, and you were doing the work of like the current shaman in the village, or somebody who knew the magical ways in order to do these things. I'm reminded of that book Serpent and the Rainbow, and where this biologist, or was he a biologist, Wade something, he went down to Haiti to investigate this and to find out the medicine that they were using to turn these people into so-called zombies. And you know, it was basically a poison, and it was a powder that they would blow in these people's faces, and then they would, for all intents and purposes, they would appear dead. You know, I mean, their heart rate would slow down to well, wickedly slow, and they would bury them, thinking that they were dead. Well, 2 days later, they'd get up, get out of the grave, and walk around, and suddenly they're a zombie, and they believe that they're zombies. And so it was really a mind-washing technique. So yeah. So I mean, that's really the way zombies happen. Was that?
You hit that on the head, man.
Yeah. But yeah, that's how the whole zombie thing used to be. And then here comes George Romero with the famous film Night of the Living Dead. And wasn't it originally going to be called Night of the Ghouls, the flesh-eating ghouls?
I don't remember.
And so he didn't even really call them zombies. But suddenly they gained this notoriety as being zombies, and that zombies were the undead who were coming back to attack the living, you know? And then once they attack the living, then the living become the undead. And so, I mean, it's totally changed over the years. You know, but
well, the one thing I'll say about zombies, it's interesting to me, fascinating. Okay, so yes, as you so eloquently just described, Damien, the modern zombies are very different than their origins. But the modern depiction of a zombie it does happen actually exactly like you say to animals. It does happen. Like there are animals like insects that get zombified and mind controlled by other animals. And that does happen as well to plants. Fungus, I think, parasites. So it happens. And it is 100% plausible that it could happen to humans. So that is very odd that it isn't made up, but it actually does have a lot of validity in that it does happen in an
oddly enough,
kingdom.
And unfortunately, before you go on, I just want to tell you that reminds me of Resident Evil. The reason that they're all zombified is from a virus or some sort of fungal infection. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's true. I don't know. So that's very interesting because like there is a lot there. So once again, if I'm going to talk about the modern zombie, I see zombieism does seem to maybe have I don't know, maybe like an environmental thing to it because of overpopulation or too much consumerism. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, that's certainly what George Romero was trying to do with like Dawn of the Dead, where the whole thing takes place in a mall. And he was talking about, I mean, all of his movies are parallels for something going on in society. But that one was about consumerism and how we, you know, overconsume. Yeah.
Well, look at what the drugs were doing too, how they were reacting, and people were acting zombified down in Florida as well. With the bath salt issue.
The bath salt, right. I remember that. Yeah. The guy like chewed off some guy's face or something.
It wasn't just one.
Yeah, it was a couple of people.
It was several. I mean, people, the police were shooting people, you know, several times and tasing them unaffectedly.
Yeah.
That's the result of the drug for sure. Like much like PCP,
Yeah.
it gives you that false sense of well, we could go into it, but
Numbness.
yeah, you see that there. It's interesting because those are characteristics of something reflective within our entertainment. It's not necessarily that's where they came from. Obviously, we know that this guy was taking bath salts, whereas even though he exhibits similar behavior, I think it's a misnomer. People calling that zombie-like activity. But it was at the height of a time where, Walking Dead was just coming out, and we already had many of these zombie movies that had hit the market, and it was in people's consciousness. So it's only natural, I think, for them to attribute that act to some sort of zombie activity.
Sure.
But look
absolutely.
at the craft that's used in down in Louisiana as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about with the voodoo and the hoodoo?
Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely.
Well, something that zombies, vampires, and werewolves we talked about, they all have in common is it does seem to they're all an illness. It seems like they're all like a contagion that you can catch.
Yeah.
Which look what's happening in the world right now. We're dealing with a contagion right now that is really messing up the entire world.
Mm. Well, yeah, and I got to say, I write horror, and nothing really scares me anymore. I mean, nothing really phases me, but I still have nightmares about zombies. And I think the reason being is because I consider it to be plausible. Like Michael was saying, he said, like in Resident Evil, it went back to a virus that was spread. You know? And exactly. I mean, and so I think it's something that
biological explanation.
Yeah, I think it could feasibly happen, and the reason being is because, like what Wild Trees was saying about these insects that have been proven to be controlled by other species of insects and that kind of thing, and even mammals, I think, have been proven to have the same issue. But how far does it go from there to us? It
just seems like it's one thing after another.
Yeah. Now, whether or not the virus will cause us to try to eat people, I don't know if that's going to be. But what was that one zombie movie? 28 Days, 28 Days Later. But it was based on an airborne rabies infection that drove people mad. And they weren't really zombies. They weren't undead. But, they went crazy and started killing people. And so, like I said, the whole idea of zombies is probably the only creature out there that scares me anymore, because I think it could possibly happen.
Okay, check this out. So I want to mention something about the possibility of zombies being real, because it was just ringing some bells in my head.
Out now.
Exactly. I am. Okay, so you mentioned rabies. We all know about rabies. Rabies is a very, we know that it can make you act like a zombie. You get rabies by getting bitten by a mammal that has rabies. So if you ever see a wild mammal, please don't touch it, because it might give you rabies. But it reminded me about this other disease that I was listening to lectures in when I was in school, and it's a big problem, and it's getting worse in North America. It's called a wasting disease in deer, and it's a prion disease. So a prion disease, I believe that means it's a virus, I think. Hold on a second. I'm not sure about that. Well, it's a prion disease, and it does make you act like a zombie. And these deer are getting it. Now, wasting disease is similar to mad cow disease, which humans can also get. So humans can get mad cow disease from a cow by eating a cow. And I think cows originally got mad cow disease because they were being fed pieces of other cow. Like I think they ate cow brain, and that made them have. As you can see, I'm not a virologist. So, but anyway, wasting disease it's affecting deer. Yeah, wasting disease is affecting deer, and there is the thought that it could affect humans, because it is starting to get not under control, and it could end up being a big problem in the future. So here's something I found, and it's from the CDC.gov, and it's about wasting disease in humans. So let me pull this up real fast. It says, the question is, can humans get wasting disease? It says, to date, there have been no reported cases of chronic wasting disease in people. However, Some animal studies suggest that chronic wasting disease poses a risk to certain types of non-human primates, like monkeys, that eat meat from CWD infected animals or come in contact with the brain or body fluids from infected deer or elk. So that's the tiniest little window to say that we could get chronic wasting disease, which is basically like a zombie.
Okay, I was going to ask you, what are the symptoms of wasting disease? I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I think you start acting brainless. Like I think it affects the brain. So let me see. I'll look up if somebody wants to take over, I'll just look up the symptoms real fast and then I'll read it to you guys.
Michael?
Is Michael frozen?
Frozen. Oh, there he is. Oh, no,
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to agree with you on this, Damien, that's probably the most likely scenario in respect to feasibility. The idea that something biological could invade our bodies is something that we deal with every single day, especially in these times. So that's much closer to home than perhaps something much outside ourselves in the way of understanding, a magical explanation or what have you for its existence. Like Wild Tree said, and that was an incredible point that he brought up, that, other animals and of course plants can be taken over by certain biological components. The first thing I had thought was what he mentioned too, was again the fungus, where it does attack these plants and literally controls them for whatever natural existence is left. It makes me wonder, I mean, if we're sitting here talking about this now, if somebody else hadn't in a lab somewhere come to this conclusion and perhaps even test on humans, wherein it only got so far because perhaps the disease at one point, sooner than later shut the body down. So, this effect only lasted so long. There was no actual use for it. It wouldn't surprise me to find out if there had been some sort of biological experimentation in this way, especially given the fact that it's so popular in pop culture and the media there, especially with games and so forth. It's the same story being recycled, but in different ways. And for some weird reason, it doesn't really get old.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've been playing Resident Evil for 20 years here. Go ahead.
I got a list of symptoms for chronic wasting disease. And you guys tell me, does this sound like a zombie to you? Okay. Number one, you have drastic weight loss, which is where the wasting comes from. You have stumbling, lack of coordination, listlessness, drooling, excessive thirst or urination, drooping ears. Well, I guess this is if you're a deer, and lack of fear of people. Lack of fear of people. So you have the lack of fear. So yeah, to me, those sound like zombies.
Yeah, definitely.
Sounds like babies too, without the madness.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's interesting that all three of these legendary creatures we're talking about, vampires, werewolves, as well as zombies, it all goes back to cannibalism in one way or another. You know, I mean, and I wonder if a lot of this isn't just cautionary tales about cannibalism.
Could be.
But there was an article I came across recently about this incident that happened back in 1976 in Ireland. And evidently what happened was there was a little town in Ireland, and I don't remember the name of it, but this fog descended upon the town one evening at like 7:00 at night. And the fog gave everybody an uneasy feeling. And so most people went inside to avoid being in it. But the people that did remain outside made numerous, like 60 people reported the undead walking around in this fog. And the cops, I guess, thought, oh, well, they're just playing pranks on us. But evidently the next morning they went out and patrolled the local cemetery, and all these graves had been dug up and the bodies were gone. And to this day, nobody's ever been able to explain this, and no bodies have ever been recovered.
Wow.
So I just thought that was a really weird story,
Is there a name for this incident by any chance?
Really is.
If you look it up, just look up the dead walk in Ireland. You'll find it through Google.
Okay.
Yeah, but like I said, I can't find where it happened exactly, what the name of the little village was. But yeah, apparently it was just a little village. But yeah.
Got it.
I wonder. I have
I'll
a
be
question
looking that up.
I have a question for the group, not to divert too much from zombies, but I wonder what everybody's favorite TV or movie monster is, and I'll say mine because I think it's pretty accurate. Is I think it's Pennywise, the dancing clown from It, Stephen King's It, because it's an extraterrestrial. Actually, a lot of people think it's a clown, which it looks like a clown, but it's a shapeshift.
So hard.
It's a shape-shifting extraterrestrial that likes to scare people because it makes them taste better and it eats them. So
Right.
I think there's a lot of truth to paranormal entities liking to scare people, getting some effect from their fear, and the shape-shifting thing is also there.
Maybe it's adrenaline. Maybe it's something in the adrenaline.
It's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It could be. Yeah, most definitely. But I don't know. We're both horror movie fans. What's your favorite?
God, I don't know if I could pick a favorite. Probably one of my favorites is Hannibal Lecter.
Oh,
He's
interesting.
not an actual monster, but more
I think so.
monsters are more human
Yeah.
than actual fakes. So
Very cool.
What about you, Ken?
Cannibal too.
Or sorry, go ahead, Ralph. Sorry, Damien. Jesus.
Oh, I
Sorry,
was just
you're the
going to
one
say,
who's hosting. I'll just shut up now.
I was just going to say, I don't know that I could pick a favorite. Like I said, nothing scares me anymore except for zombies. So I think the whole idea of zombieism scares me more than anything else, you know?
I think Wild Trees did it for you tonight then.
Yeah, thanks, buddy.
Welcome.
Kim, what about you? Who's your favorite? What's your favorite monster?
That's gonna be a difficult one. I think Ralph hit a lot of that. Hannibal Lecter is pretty good. I watched that several times. I think that whole series was good, especially since it's so true.
Yeah. But
Especially since it's so true, that just really makes you. It kind of strikes a note too.
yeah. Guys, I hate to cut this short, but I'm getting a notification that my Wi-Fi is cutting out, and so I may just cut this short tonight, a little bit short tonight, because otherwise we're just going to go to a blank screen. So, so anyway, everybody, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and definitely check out the links that we have in the descriptions. You know, we've got the Paranormal News Network podcast that we do. And then Michael has DarkHour Paranormal here at YouTube. And Wild Trees, as well as Kim, have groups at Facebook, and you can check those out there. Also, I want to mention one. Oh, I just want to mention one more thing. We just started doing this. If you like what we do here at Black Lotus, give us a little support. Show us some love. We have a link in the description to buy me a coffee. And, for as little as $5, and it's a one-time donation, you can throw us a cup of coffee. And and we would highly appreciate it. But I'm sorry, Kim, you were about to say something?
No, I was going to say, guys, feel free to advertise on my webpage too. Not So Paranormal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely check it out. And we also have the Black Lotus discussion group over at Facebook, which is a really good group, great group of people. No trolls or anything like that. Everybody behaves themselves. So, and we're not one of those groups.
On mine either.
Yeah, and we're not one of those groups that post silly memes about paranormal and that kind of stuff. I mean, we have some serious discussions about it. So, yeah. But anyway, I think we are going to get out of here for the night. Guys, thank you very much for joining us with us once again. Always a pleasure.
Good night, guys.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Night.
Until next time, keep thinking and question everything.